How's everyone's sessions going so far? Conference, good? Woo! Everyone's got a beer. If you don't, we'll have beer soon enough. So thanks for coming. This is Unlocking Potential Through Supplier Collaboration, and we have three wonderful speakers today. First up, we have Megan Parisi. Megan has been a brewer for more than 20 years, working at Cambridge Brewing Company, Blue Jacket, and Wormtown Brewery, before joining the Sam Adams team in 2015. Megan has also been a beer judge at domestic and international competitions since 2010, as well as invited presenter at multiple conferences. Most recently, Megan has transitioned to developing products in the Beyond Beer space of Boston Beer Company's portfolio. In addition to her brewing certifications, Megan holds degrees in classical music performance from Boston University and spent near the early years of her professional life as a clarinetist in the United States Navy Band in Washington, D.C. This formative part of her education influences the way that she crafts, noting the marriage of science and art in the formation of recipes and exploration of flavors and techniques. Welcome, Megan. Next up, we have Heather McReynolds. With over 15 years of experience in the beer industry, Heather has held numerous roles. She first fell in love with beer while bartending and managing a 400-bottle beer bar during her graduate school years in Florida. She started her brewing career in Georgia before moving to New York City 13 years ago to brew at and later oversee Six Point Brewery's pilot facility in Red Hook, Brooklyn. Go Red Hook, Brooklyn! For 5 years, she worked with Guinness, focusing on beer education and social media marketing. And for the last 4.5 years, she has been working for Hopsteiner, a family-owned, vertically integrated hop grower and merchant established in 1845. Welcome, Heather. And then finally, we have Mike Killelea. Growing up in the Boston area, Mike was inspired by the New England craft brewing scene and began home brewing in the galley kitchen of his small apartment. After moving to Virginia and completing the American Brewers Guild Craft Brewers Apprenticeship Program, he spent the next 10 years working at two Central Virginia breweries, Legend Brewing Company and Center of the Universe Brewing Company, where he was the head brewer. Mike is also one of the founders of the Virginia Craft Brewers Guild and served as the initial chairman for its first 4 years. Those first 4 years saw several key state legislative changes, including the passage of SB 604, the so-called taproom law. Since joining Briess in 2016, Mike has consumed a large quantity of Malt and milk balls. He's an active member of the NBA and has served as a judge for GABF. Welcome, Mike. And I hope I got your last name right. Apologies if I didn't. This is your panel.
Thank you. Got to press. All right, is this thing on? There we go. We're in business now. Okay, well, good afternoon. Thanks all for being here. And today we're going to talk about utilizing, making the most of your supplier relationships. So kind of want to just talk about, how you feel when a supplier, walks into your place of work. Are you excited? Do you feel a little agita? Do you feel kind of annoyed? Well, we've all been there. You're busy and, someone, you may roll your eyes and you're waiting for that sales pitch. But what we want to look at is the encounters that you actually do have with your suppliers. Have there been times when you've worked with them and then your expectations were not met, and I mean your negative expectations, that you're surprised with what you can actually encounter, that you've got the expertise and not just a simple sales pitch from your friends. So what we want to discuss here is how you can actually make the most of your relationships, as a brewer and as a producer. And at the fun part of this is that there will be a little case study of a collaboration that we all did together, and we've got the beer here for everyone to enjoy. This is actually our first time all three sharing it together, so it's our first toast as well. And, oh no, I'm back. There we go. Well, I know we got a, whoops, oh no. There we go. Okay, we're back. I know we got a great introduction, but still want to give just a couple minutes to tell just a little more about ourselves. So I'm Megan Parisi, and just had to change the title on here. I am a product developer at the Boston Beer Company. I began homebrewing like a lot of us in the early 90s, just kind of fell in love with that, that good old, kitchen magic. And took about 10 years before thinking I could, take this crazy hobby and turn it into a profession. Started, scrubbing floors and washing kegs for free, of course, and kept showing up at 6 a.m. every Monday until finally Cambridge Brewing Company decided, well, she's got to keep showing up. I guess we got to start paying her. So that turned into a job, which then led to several others. I've been at the Boston Beer Company now for over 10 years, doing R&D for a long time on the beer side, running a small innovation tap room for the past 6 years, and starting next week, I will be transitioning into product development on the Beyond Beer side. So, old dog's never too old to learn some new tricks, and and also, it'll be a really great experience for me on learning some new supplier relationships and how to maximize them. Yeah, so move on. Let's introduce a little more to Heather and Mike. Oh, yeah, Mike is next. Yeah, it's you, Mike.
Yeah, I'll just quickly go over it. I grew up in the Boston area, homebrewed, and actually loved Cambridge Brewing Company. It was one of my favorites. I feel like I'm going to pour a little out for CBC. So, but yeah, I've been with Briess for about 10 years now. I can't believe how much I know about malt. But you also learn. I've had the pleasure of learning from Megan and Heather throughout this process as well. So it's been a great experience, and I'm excited to be here talking about this beer and this project.
And then, I think this is just reiterating everything that Jason said during the intro. But been doing this a while. I'm so glad that I've been able to be in the beer industry for as long as I have, and doing lots of different roles. But now I really love just being with Hopsteiner and just focusing on hops. Maybe we're supposed to be touching on it a little bit later, I think, but my whole thing when I was brewing in 6 Point, it just felt like there was so much that I had to stay on top of and learn, keep up with what was happening, what's new in malt and what's new in hops and what's new in cleaning processes. And it's even a little less stressful now to be okay, I'm just gonna deep dive hops. I'm just gonna know everything there is. I don't care about malt, right? He can do his thing. I'm just gonna be hops, and so I dig it. But I think that's a pretty good summary of me.
Yeah, so now we're gonna just kind of move into some discussion, thinking about what is it that suppliers can actually do for you and how they can help you, in your production, in your brewing ventures. So, I kind of want to talk just a little bit about what did you first think of? What did you think of suppliers when you were a brewer? Was there, anything? Did you have those kinds of reactions that someone might have either really made you roll your eyes, or actually did you have experiences that kind of opened your eyes to what a supplier could be?
So when I became a head brewer, I had two suppliers that I worked with that really became partners, and I learned a lot from. And then so that would have been Alan Young from BSG, and then Whitney Thompson, who at the time was with Cargill. They were very much partners, and I often talk with them about what my goals were, what I wanted to achieve in a beer, and they weren't just recommending the most expensive or the least expensive product. They helped me kind of find the right blend of malts to get where I needed to be. And then on the hop side, I had a great experience with Mike Sutton. Heather knows very well. I just had a conversation Hopsteiner. Had a great conversation with him, I believe at an MBA meeting, where I talked about one of the bittering hops that I was using. I just wasn't consistent, would get you probably know, get kind of some onion and garlic sometimes. And he had an extract at the time that he said, well, let me send you this can. And I believe I want to say it was Atanum, maybe I could be wrong. And it was just a bittering extract. And I started using that in the kettle, first edition. And it just not only did it make the beer a lot cleaner, and I was a lot happier with the bitterness, I also had a less trube in the kettle at the end. So just a conversation over a beer at an MBA meeting with a supplier that I knew very well, that I trusted, solved an issue for me. You know, that's the kind of thing that when I became a supplier, I really admired and looked at people like Alan and Whitney and Mike. And when I started with Briess, that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be an advisor. I wanted to help people get where they needed to be with malt, not hops, but just malt. I wanted to be an advisor, a partner, not just. We can be a transactional relationship. You can just call us up and buy whatever malt, and that's fine. But I also like partnering and finding the best solutions for brewers.
Yeah. When I was at 6 Point and brewing, it was like the heyday of beer, and I was there until 2015, and so we were contract brewing most of what we were doing. The pilot system in Red Hook, we did fun stuff, and we did a lot of trial brews, obviously, but it was kind of like unlimited budget time. So I remember lots of really great dinners with suppliers, because I think we were spending a ton of money at the time. So that was nice too. But I almost have the opposite. I think I mentioned earlier, I was always kind of stressed out at 6 Point that I wasn't staying on top of everything. And I wish I had leaned into my suppliers a little bit more, because, we did have some great people around us, and, spending a lot of money with somebody sure helps get their ear. But I also really love, even you said, the small example of that's an easy solve. And I love hearing those kind of success stories like that too. And I wish I had leaned into my suppliers a little bit more. I didn't think about them at the time as those subject matter experts, and I really should have, because I think I would have been less stressed if I had just leaned on them and be yeah, give me that hop report. I want to see that. And how do I actually use this can of CO2 extract? Somebody gave me one, and it sat on my desk for a year because I didn't know how to use it. So yeah, almost the opposite of what Mike experienced, I think. But yeah.
I mean, I know for me, I spent 8 years, brewing at Cambridge without really having a lot of interactions with the salespeople. Just, they weren't coming into, a tiny brewery at that time. But I wound up in DC after that, working on opening Blue Jacket down there. Sorry, feedback. And I mean, I was out of my element. I'd never worked in a one of the first 2 pub brewing systems built in the country, and just held together with duct tape and bungee cords and buckets, and then had to figure out how to actually build a brewery and all the things that we were going to need. Fortunately, there was a great community in the DC area, just of other brewers who were willing to share knowledge. But one thing I remember in particular was looking at chemicals. I had just gone from having one big mixing brink, you're dumping in your powdered caustic, then rinsing it out, using acid through that. Just one thing like that, but trying to set up for, a bigger concept production space, and sitting with, Steve Gerloff from Madison Chemical, coming and visiting. And sure, of course, he wanted me to go with Madison Chemical, but we just sat down at a Potbelly sandwich company across the street, and just, we talked. He just talked me through all the kinds of considerations, looking at the space, what might be things that I would need to think about in setting up, in setting up our approach, because we were going to have tanks on several different floors. So, lots of, not just your standard complications, but, he helped make sure that I understood the safety concerns, the practical concerns of operating, and it was a really great sort of introduction for me into how a partnership could be like that. So that was that was a really impactful moment. Now, Heather, you already kind of mentioned this, touched upon something that you wish that you had known when you were a brewer still, before getting onto the supply side. Is there anything that Mike, that you might say, or anything additional you want to share with that, Heather, about what do you wish that you had known as a brewer before getting onto the supply side about these relationships and what people can offer?
I would just say be proactive instead of reactive. As a maltster, I generally hear a lot of like problems that happen after they happen. Milling issues, lautering issues. Don't be afraid to ask questions ahead of time. Don't be afraid to reach out to me and Heather and other suppliers about, what is this gonna, what's the crop year change looking like? What's especially color issues, things like that. We often have like better options. You might have like 5 or 6 malts in a beer. And if we have a conversation about what your goals are, you might be able to hit those goals with 3 or 4 malts and things like that. So I'd say just don't just reach out to your supplier when there's an issue. Reach out to them when you just want to learn something, or maybe you're trying a new malt or a new hop. Don't be afraid to reach out. We love talking and talking up our products and how we can do things more efficiently, better. So just that's the one thing I learned when I both was a head brewer and as a supplier is I just wish people would reach out before or be, as they're developing things. Don't hesitate to reach out to your suppliers.
Yeah. I'm gonna echo like exactly what you just said. What I didn't do when I was at 6 Point, but like, yeah, if you just are like, I want to see the 2025 crop report, can you send it to me? Fine, cool. Like, you don't have to reach out just because you want to buy something. It literally can be just, hey, can you send me some more information on LLZ? Sure, awesome, great. Or what is acreage looking like in Germany for 2026, right? Like, that's fine. Like, if that's the question, if that's what you're curious about, if that's what you, like, reach out. That's totally cool. Yeah, same thing that Mike said. Like, I love talking about hops.
So I want to touch on something that you'd said, Heather, about kind of feeling a little overwhelmed, as a brewer, and feeling like, I know I have felt this too at times, especially earlier on, where you're trying to keep a handle on so much knowledge and feeling like you don't have enough. What might you guys actually say to someone who's feeling overwhelmed and is in maybe the stage of, I don't know what I don't know, to be able to ask those kind of proactive questions, like, coming to you, Mike, about, before there's a lautering issue, or trying to even ask about, the crop report.
Sure.
To kind of allay those fears of not wanting to look like you don't know something, as opposed, and having that kind of hold you back.
I think, like, on a basic level, I would just start with thinking about, like, from a hop perspective, like, what are the varieties I'm using, right? Like, assuming you're going to continue to use them over the next year or so, right? Like, that's a good place to start. What's the outlook on these varieties for the next year? How much acreage is changing or not, or what's it look like, or, especially with import stuff is pretty wonky right now, right? Like, just start with that. Hey, I'm using a lot of Tettnang, right? What's the forecast looking like for Tettnang? Where are we at right now? What's pricing looking like? What should I be thinking about if I want to use this more? Or if I don't, right? Like, maybe I need to look at alternatives. I think that's a good place to start, is just literally thinking about the hops that you're already using.
Yeah, it's tough to know what you don't know. And I think Heather had a good point earlier where she called us, we're subject matter experts. We kind of are. When I was brewing at Center Universe as a head brewer, I thought I knew a lot. I thought I knew everything about malt, and hops. And then when I joined Briess and I talked with our tech services team and our barley growers, and you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So just reach out to your suppliers. They are subject matter experts, whether it's malt or hops or even cans and sealing your, getting the right seal in your cans, things like that. I thought I knew everything, or I thought I knew a lot, and I didn't. And I'm glad that I did have some resources like, Whitney and Alan, and I even worked with Steve at Medicine Chemical, and he came in, and I'd never passivated a tank before, and he lived up the street from the brewery, thankfully, so he sat one afternoon and just, yeah, you're doing it right, You have anything on tap? So it's just, don't be afraid to reach out and admit, maybe I don't know as much about, malt and hops and even cans and labels and whatever.
Yeah, to add in real quick, like, listen, I'm still learning about hops. I'm 4.5 years into this, and like I still sometimes have conversations with people that are way above my pay grade, and probably the same situation as Mike, where it's like, oh, I didn't realize that. Cool, that's awesome. So yeah, that's the other part of it too. Is like it's probably the same boat as Mike. Like if I don't know something, I'm also not going to BS you. Like I will just tell you, you know what? I think it's this, but I'm not quite sure. But we have teams of people behind us that I can text and be like, hey, so a brewer's asking about this. What do you think? Kind of thing. Like. There's people behind us that also know more than we know too.
No, this is great. I think one key aspect that I've had to develop over the years, it's like coming out of this conversation is kind of getting over my own ego and realizing that like admitting that I don't know something is not that there's no weakness. You guys aren't going to judge me for calling with questions ahead of time. For saying like I don't know how this works. I don't understand what's going on here. Can you help me? Can you help me just understand? Mm-hmm. So cool. Well, let's move on to the fun part for a little bit. Beer. So kind of, how did we get here? We had a little, kind of started with a little talk that, Mike and I were having about a beer that I had been working on. I've got a penchant for cocktail-inspired beers, and I'd been working on one with that was Negroni-inspired. And I just wasn't getting the color right. Mike had there was a new Briess there, Crystal Red Malt. So I called him up about that, and we started talking about. I sent him some numbers like of what we had been using and what might this Crystal Red do. Could we, how might we be able to get it in? This is the kind of color that I'm looking for. So we started talking about that, but then I've done the Negroni a few times, and we were thinking, kind of occurred to me that wanted to do a little something different, and we decided we were talking about the Sazerac cocktail in New Orleans. So wanted to unpack something and actually try something new instead of trying to fix the recipe that hadn't quite dialed in. Let's actually go at this with something new, and. So we started working on, a recipe that would be inspired by the Sazerac cocktail, and realizing also that, not only is the malt going to be important, but with the botanical and bitter and bitter aspects of the cocktail, we definitely wanted to bring in, another hop expert as well to kind of go through the project. But then also we were thinking about this this whole idea of working together. And putting this together as a discussion. Originally, the idea for the talk came out of a passing conversation Heather and I had several years ago at an MBAA meeting, where she was lamenting that people didn't seem to utilize their expertise, like the supplier expertise as much, and started thinking about how can we do that. So let's work together on this beer, and then talk about the beer in the end. So the Sazerac cocktail, rye whiskey, a little bit of sugar, Peychaud's bitters, which are very unique, a dash of herb saint or absinthe just to rinse the glass, and lemon twist. There isn't just one platonic ideal of the cocktail. You go to any bar and you're going to have a lot of different versions of a Sazerac. So you're never going to duplicate this in a beer regardless by using traditional ingredients. So just taking the inspiration, how could we actually do this? So certainly talked with Mike about malt, Heather about hops, and we can go through some of the questions that we had and thoughts about these ingredients. And then the beer. So Mike had some ideas on the malt bill. So part of the fun was actually that we had to drink a lot of Sazeracs to really get to know the cocktail. So I highly recommend doing your own research.
Is everyone familiar with it? Has everyone had a Sazerac? I had never had one before. I'm more of an old-fashioned person, and it was a lot of fun going out and ordering Sazeracs and seeing the different. They were mostly kind of in this realm. And realizing, drinking the Sazerac, you realize right away that there's a couple of key, well, for me as a maltster, there's a couple of key things. There's the rye component. There's the bitterness of like the herb saint, right? Is that what it's?
Yeah, herb saint or
Or
absinthe.
absinthe. And then to me, the color was always this beautiful. I think we actually nailed the color. This beautiful kind of ruby reddish color. And so as a maltster, you know, I'm thinking, I know how to nail this color. You know, talk about the rye component. And then I knew that Heather was going to be able to come in and, you know, that the component of the bitterness and then that lemon twist, I knew that she would be able to add. And so we just had numerous conversations about what each one of us got out of the Sazerac, what the key flavor components, and we kind of came to a consensus pretty early.
Yeah. So for the hop side of this, if you've had a Sazerac cocktail, I feel like it's the bitterness in the rye that's really forward, but then like there's a huge chunk of lemon in it, and it's very lemony as well. It's almost balanced between like the rye, the bitter, and the lemon. So knew there would be something lemon in this too, but to start from the beginning. Played around with Megan too with using hop flow. So hop flow is just a CO2 extract with some beta acids removed so that it's flowable at room temperature. Really easy for her to dose into her small. What size was your system again? It's
5 hectoliter.
5 hex, right? She didn't want to use just your typical CO2 extract, but she was curious about using something that was an extracted product, right, to save yield. So we used some hop flow for 31 IBUs. And then Akoya is actually a German hop that does a really nice perle type vibe to it. So that kind of brought in a little bit of that herbal quality. And then again, to save some yield on that little tiny 5 hex system, we used some lemon drop lupulin pellets. So that's a T45 concentrated pellet. And then got her some lemon drop hop oil so that she could just add that to taste essentially afterwards, right? So that's literally a hop oil product in PG and super easy to dose as much or as little as you want on the cold side. So wanted to make sure that was available to her, and she added what she wanted. And then the fennel too, right? You talked to a little bit more bitterness, herbalness,
Yeah, and I had been I'd been definitely hesitant about using any extracts or concentrated hop products, primarily because it was such a small system, and like the precision in measuring what I actually get to the specs that I was looking for, what I actually get, what kind of utilization would I get, we hadn't experimented with it on this system, because it just didn't seem practical at such a small scale. But Heather, when we came for the brew day, and we talked about it ahead of time, but then on the brew day, we sat and did the calculations to figure out how much we could actually use and should actually use, and I was very, very pleased, and have been much more open to the idea of reducing that volume of hop matter, being able to stretch out the volume of beer, a finished beer at the end, while still getting the kind of the flavor and bitterness components and characteristic that we were looking for. So you definitely, I've used them before on larger systems, but on one this small, I really didn't think it was going to be practical, and I was really, really pleased with that.
Yeah, I was going to say hop flow is really designed for smaller systems anyway, because it's flowable at room temperature and easy to dose, and then it literally just comes in a jug. We got a sample size, but it comes in a jug, so you can seal it back up and put it back in your fridge when you're done. So yeah.
Yeah, because most of my experience with CO2 extracts is I didn't have an incubator. I didn't have anywhere to keep it warm. Once you open up a big can, it's just not practical. But that there was a flowable product that I could use, and that I could stretch out into others as well, without having to deal with potential waste or even more inefficiency. Because when I had first tried that when we were commissioning the system, I was not impressed with how the CO2 extracts worked. But these flowable products, definitely made me much more interested in pursuing that for other beers as well.
That kind of goes into the next slide.
Yeah. So then we get to the brew day. everyone came on site. We got to have a
Ready to
great
take
time.
this?
Yeah, you might want to take this. I'm still a little. No. So we'll talk about the rye part. There was if we go back to the recipe, does it say?
Let's just say we
There
did
was
it
a lot of
twice,
rye.
and we might have removed some things.
Might have removed some rye.
There were some lautering issues on the brew day. And quite honestly, this is one of those things where, as a supplier, especially in the second time around, like when I saw a couple things like maybe the mill gap for rye was a little tight, it was a little dusty. And honestly, on the second time that we brewed it, we had an honest conversation. Like we had inclusion of caramel rye in there as well, and was that really needed? It was an extra 4 or 5%. We were already getting most of the color from the crystal red, so we removed that. Because honestly, I was just thinking, rye is very high viscosity, high beta-glucans, and putting caramel rye in there probably wasn't needed, right? We got a lot of the color and the flavor from the rye malt and from the crystal red, so we removed that. The second one, we weren't even there, went much smoother. So it's just one of those things like, yeah. In retrospect, I probably should have had a little more maybe input on like the milling, and probably should not have included the caramel rye to start, because the second one, went much better. Again, that was back and forth discussions, but the second one went much better.
It was a great learning because I knew on my system I had brewed with, without problem with rye of 20%, and this was just under 20. So I figured, we're going to be fine. But not taking into consideration, again, these were 2 new ryes that we hadn't worked with on our mill with our mill settings, and the crystal rye was probably a lot more friable and just turned into a lot more powder. So removing that, even though I knew my system could handle it, what was I wrong?
The hops were great though.
Yeah, the hops were great.
The hops were great.
I will say though, because it's worth noting, I'm seeing it in the picture. I also sent Megan, she had the lemon drop hop oil to add after the facts, and I also sent her some LLZ. So that's a new fractionated hop oil product for us that tastes and smells like lemons and limes. And I kind of had it in my head like it might skew a little too limey for this, but I still wanted to have her smell it and taste it and trial it in a couple, a little bit of the beer. And I think you concluded that it did actually scale a little too limey, but at least the lemon component part of it is really cool. And I wish we could have isolated that a little bit more, but it is what it is. You tried.
Yeah, no, I tried, and it was great to have some more options, especially on the finishing side, to be able to have do little ways to dial in. Because even with the cocktail, I was really surprised at, even though I'd had them before, I'd never really dissected it until I wanted to take the inspiration, and I was surprised every time I had them at how prominent the lemon was, even though it was just a lemon twist. So it wound up being a more impactful component than we expected. So now this was just a single, even though we did a second brew, this was still just a one-off release at my tap room. So what do we have, about 7 barrels total, of this produced. So cost and practicality weren't really a consideration, which is nice, in the tap room, but I also work at a larger brewery that we could consider scaling it up, or anyone could consider scaling up. Say you've got a recipe that you want to take on from a smaller scale, and maybe you're thinking it's just a one-off, but hey, it just knocks it out of the park. You fall in love, and then you have to figure out, can we actually do this? What are the things that you need to consider? So one to talk about. This is a great way to I think to really leverage your suppliers, because they will know or help guide you how to make decisions, because the way that we brewed this was probably not, it would never fly in production at any size. It's any size. It certainly wouldn't fly at either of our production breweries. But even going from 5 barrel to a 30 barrel, you're going to have lots of different considerations about serving draft only. Are we going to go into package? What kind of package? How far is your distribution? what's your malt? What kind of things do you need to think about malt wise and hop wise?
Yeah. You want to go first?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, malt's first on the list.
Yeah, well, I think, things aren't linear, right? Like, so let's just say we move this from the pilot brewery to Cincinnati or Allentown, and like the first thing you're going to do is realize that, their efficiencies are different. So, you might need less of the crystal red and things like that. For me, if we were to do this again on a much larger system, the first thing I'd look at is the milling considerations, because that was probably the biggest issue, right? I always look at things as in kind of like two different buckets. I look at your base malt, and then I look at your specialty malt, and you might adjust the malt differently for each, right? You might be using their silo malt instead of the Heritage Gold that we used. And then when you move to the rye malt and the crystal red, those are more friable. So we might we might look at adjusting their mill ahead of time, or maybe doing a pre-milled option for that. And the other option would be as far as costs go, there's a bunch of options that we could do to save money, and it's not just money, it's also labor. Could we do a blended super sack that has all the specialty malts in it, so they can just use the super sack and not use a lot of bag malt? And these are just discussions that I would have with Megan and the team at Boston Beer about what's the best way to achieve this at the different brewery, right? And then what's the best way? Is it all in one campaign? What's the best way to get it there freight wise? How much lead time do we have? These are all the things that I would want to talk about, and we could have some solutions that might work better for labor, for cost, and those are the things that I think we could really help on, but especially milling.
Yeah, sure. Especially milk. So as far as the hops go, things, I mentioned this earlier, right? Import hops are a little bit tricky right now. So I think I definitely want to hone in on that Acquoia coming from Germany and make sure, take a step back. I like the herbal component that it brings, but do we explore trying to replicate that with the U.S. hops so that we're not having any potential delays with shipping coming from Germany? You're not having any tariffs added onto it. It's a lot easier to get hops domestically and get them where they need to go domestically. When you're having another country involved, it gets a little bit tricky. So, do we need to stick with Acquoia? Do we need to swap it out for something else American that does that similar thing? I'd want to explore that a little bit, I think. Definitely acreage outlooks for both, right? This is something I kind of stress to everybody, right? Mentioning specific hops that you guys are using, but you should look at acreage outlooks and what those look like, and just trying to stay on top of those sorts of things. I know now, Lemon Drop and Acquoia are both pretty stable as far as the acreage goes, but if this was scaled up to a large production, we definitely need to make sure we have a supply of that coming, and that acreage isn't changing if they're using it at a big scale. And that goes to say too, the contracting, right? So contracting, sure, is definitely about locking in that price, but it's also making sure that there are going to be plants in the ground in the future for this. So I'd want to look at that and explore that with them. Also too, frankly, from a finance perspective, I know finance people really love that too, as far as knowing what they're going to be paying for raw ingredients in the future. So outside of just the brew house, right, the other people that are involved in the brewery and making decisions, finance people generally love contracting for that reason. And then thinking too, do we need to change up the packaging considerations first on how this is going to be using? I was more thinking about this as far as the lemon drop hop oil. How do we need to package it for them to make sure that it's easy for them to integrate into their process? When specifically is it going to go in at a production level? At what point do they want to add it to that process? Megan just kind of added it whenever she wanted, but it'll probably go in at a certain time. If we're talking about a big Boston Beer brewery, what do we need to look at for that perspective too? But then lots of other considerations as well, right?
Yeah, there's obviously a lot more things that go into making a beer than the more than just hops or malt, and we have to care about the malt. But seriously, any kind of scale up, and it doesn't matter what size. It doesn't matter if whether it's the 200 barrel system for Boston Beer or 30 barrel system, 50 barrel system, anything that's going to be producing more at at a distribution level versus, draft right over the tap. So you probably have to think about, you've got to think about yeast. If you're going to be going to a different facility, is the yeast that you used, in your tap room going to be one that will actually work at the scale that you're looking at? I know I've had experience scaling up recipes from our R&D facility to our production facility, especially back when we were developing our hazy IPA. Settled on everything, nailed the profile. First runs in production, the yeast just failed. I mean, it was just catastrophic. We couldn't recover. We couldn't recover any to be able to propagate and continue that. And we you couldn't afford to be doing something one and done. So we had to go back to the drawing board. But that was also a strange time in product development where we weren't really utilizing a supplier relationship to, everything was still so proprietary, looking at, 10 years ago when no one was really talking about things. So you're really trying to figure stuff out and then having to go back to the drawing board. But if you do, we should have, leaned on suppliers more for more insight about what, how this particular yeast responds in a 10-barrel system with certain, tanks with certain geometry to, 700-barrel tanks with a very different geometry that we're just going to see. It doesn't just scale up. It's not going to be the same. So that would have been really helpful conversations to have had, and that was a miss for us. I still remember it. Your packaging. What kind of packaging are you looking at for something that would be, a new brand? Maybe something like this, a cocktail inspired, would be the type of thing. It's not an RTD or anything, but maybe you wanted to think about, does this go in a 12-ounce slim? Is that the type of thing? Can your packaging facility handle that? Is that a changeover that exists? So looking at that and then talking with your packaging suppliers, whether it's they package themselves or your canning line, to make sure is this a changeover we could do, or is the juice worth the squeeze on that? But finding the people that actually know, and then the production as well. Does it actually make sense in your brewery? Is it something, if there's going to be maybe a technique that you think is important to the quality of the beer, is it really important? And if it doesn't work in your brewery, is it worth doing that engineering to make that thing critical thing happen, or is it worth actually going to a third party and a facility that may have more flexibility that could accommodate either the different packaging that you might be thinking about, different yeast strains, different, any type of special, production, approaches and techniques. So, working with, there's so many people in the chains that are critical to bringing your products to life and, and getting them out to market, getting them to your customers, that it's really, there's so many things to consider and so many great relationships to build on. And that's kind of one of the things I wanted to close out with. We touched a little bit on this already about kind of how you wish that people might interact with you, but I guess the best way is to really, for us as makers, how can we, kind of take charge of these relationships to make sure that we build, the best relationships with you, and we can, you can help us meet our goals.
You start?
Oh, okay. Again, I would just say, I think you get the best results when you look at us as a partner and not just a supplier, not just not transactional. I want you all to use Briess. I do. I'd love it if you did. But I want you to succeed, and and Heather does too. We want you to hit we want you to be happy with your beer. We want your beer to sell, and we want to do it in an efficient, cost efficient way. Just develop a relationship with your supplier, whether it's Briess or whether you use another maltster. Develop that relationship with them, build that trust, and so that you're okay having those conversations. Just look at us as partners.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing too. It's like I have a vested interest in making sure your brewery doesn't go out of business. Right? Like, we don't sell hops to anybody else, right? I think I would love it if we did, like, I don't know, the perfume world or the pharmaceutical world, but that's still such, if anything, it's so small. Like, I need breweries to continue to do well so that I can sell more hops to more people. So, you know, yeah, we want you to succeed. And yeah, I guess to, like, we're not going to try to oversell you stuff too that you don't need either, because that doesn't work out well for anybody, right? Like, I want things to be cost effective for you so that, you know, you're hitting your cogs, so that you're selling beer at a price that you can do, but also, yeah, that the beer tastes good at the end of the day, and that your customers are happy, and that you're being successful. Like, we want that. We want that for you, because, yeah, we want to continue to have breweries to sell hops too.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming, and let's see. So, you know, I hope that you know, are taking away just like a little bit of, you know, positive information about, you know, thinking about your suppliers as partners, and, you know, what they can actually do for you, how you can develop, you know, these relationships, you know, to your best interests, and then how those relationships can actually, you know, help, you know, impact, you know, your final product and your business bottom line too, but especially get to what you want in that glass. So thank you all for coming. And any questions?
So we have about 10 minutes left, so if there's any questions, or there's also some more beer, so if anybody does want to fill up their glass, please feel free.
We can
Or
talk
raise
over
your
a
hand
beer
and I can
too.
bring it around.
I'm going to say, wait, this is 6% or so it's, you know, not a big boozer.
Yeah, it's not the target was 7 too. It didn't. The blend actually came in a little lower. I need to revise that. The first batch was a little challenging.
Any
Less right.
questions?
When Brooklyn did their take on an old fashioned, it's probably like 10 years ago, quotes, and did that factor into the choice of this one?
Yeah, so Anne was mentioning Brooklyn Brewery did like 10 years ago a really cool like take on an old fashioned. I remember they were serving it these big 750s. Like, it was a beautiful, beautiful beer. That being said, no, I tried to approach this as literally like, okay, let me have a Sazerac, let me dissect this. And frankly, like, that was such an awesome beer, but it was such a long time ago that, like, didn't really remember exactly what. And yeah, this one was a bit different, right? Like, Megan wasn't trying to be like a big boozy 10-11% thing. This was a little bit more scaled down, but no, the way I approached it was definitely like having a Sazerac and what am I tasting? And let me have another one and taste some more.
Yeah, the ode.
We didn't want to try to mimic a set. We wanted to do
duplicate
just
it.
kind of our ode to a Sazerac. You know, we didn't want to do it. First off, we didn't have time for the conference we were working on. You know, we didn't have, you know, we weren't able to age a 12% beer.
Yeah, I mean, and
We
you
can
know,
try that if anybody wants. If there's
Yeah.
future opportunities, we're available for collaborations.
They are. No, I mean, and you know, personally, I've had a little passion project about cocktail-inspired beers for several years. So I've been doing them at first at the R&D facility, and then at my little tap room for probably like 8 years. It's been just a little passion project. Everything from but I also like looking for unusual cocktails. So like an old-fashioned, very familiar old-fashioned Manhattan, things like that. They're a little more familiar to more people. So I've done things like a blood and sand. You know, just so you don't see a lot of Scotch-based cocktails. So you know, getting and aging that in, you know, in Scotch barrels, making sure there's some peated malt to get a little more in that character. But you know, looking for, you know, different, you know, I think it was a pina colada, you know, and a whole range of things that might be harder to make because I kind of like the challenge. And I think if we were looking to really like nail a Sazerac and make it taste like that, we'd probably have to go beyond the standard ingredients. That's when we'd have to, you know, talk to, you know, other suppliers, talk to flavor houses about what, you know, how do we get, you know, what flavor that we need to just completely dial that in. But This is kind of a little more old school, trying to show the inspiration within the traditional ingredient realm. But I do remember that old fashioned.
Megan, I was just curious, like from an R&D standpoint, is there like a point in your creative process where something happens that triggers you to like reach out to suppliers? Are there problems that you encounter where you're like, now I know that I need to reach out, or is it just kind of a fluid thing?
I guess it depends on whether it's purely an innovation for the sake of innovation, or if we're kind of going at a project with the idea that we already want to scale it up. Say if we're thinking about something like at this point of year, like maybe we're thinking about like something for a summer seasonal next year, we would already be thinking about that practicality, like those practical aspects. But if we're just thinking about brewing something for the tap room that we're not necessarily considering scaling up, we would probably talk to our suppliers like we did for this, for the one-off considerations on this system. But if we're already thinking about, hey, the goal here is to design a project that we can brew in production and distribute nationally, that's going to have a whole different set of considerations, even starting off on the same size system. Yeah.
Any other questions? No? All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to the panel. And enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
All right.